The Galactic Concord had long maintained its Cardinal Directive: do not engage Earth, a simple law born out of ancient warnings passed down by species that had lived to regret underestimating humanity's potential. Over millennia, the directive became a well-worn myth, something whispered about in hushed tones in the highest halls of power. Most species, having never encountered Earth, dismissed it as an outdated superstition. But the Threx dominion was different. To the Threx, a race of cold, calculating conquerors, the directive wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. Their arrogance had always been their greatest asset, and they saw no reason why the humans of Earth should be treated any differently than the countless worlds they had subjugated. Earth, with its primitive technology and disjointed governments, was ripe for conquest. The Threx saw an opportunity, one that would expand their influence further into the galaxy. The fleet of Threx warships, sleek and menacing, descended into Earth's atmosphere. Their mission was clear: demonstrate power, disable key global infrastructure, and demand Earth's immediate surrender. It would be a short, decisive strike, a quick reminder to the galaxy of the Threx's might. The humans would not be a threat. They were far too insignificant, too backward. At least, that was what Commander Yarnak, the leader of the Threx fleet, believed. His ships hummed with the power of their advanced weaponry. The surface of Earth was dotted with massive cities and technological marvels. The perfect target. He watched through the bridge's view screen as the Earth slowly grew larger, a swirling blue and green mass of continents and oceans. He tapped his clawed fingers against the armrest, his confidence growing. The fleet was ready. The humans wouldn't stand a chance. Commence the bombardment, Yarnak ordered with a sharp, authoritative voice. Across the fleet, weapons systems powered up, energy pulses crackling to life. The first barrage of fire erupted from the warships, cutting through the atmosphere. Thousands of kilometers above Earth, the skies lit up as orbital strikes disabled satellites and communications relays with terrifying precision. The fleet's weapons rained down upon power grids, cities, and military installations, leaving nothing but wreckage in their wake. But something was wrong. The Threx waited for the inevitable panic, the surrender pleas from governments. What they didn't expect was an eerie silence. The human response was delayed. At first, it was nothing more than a whisper of static. Then the human world began to react, but not in the way the Threx had planned. Instead of chaos, there was an unnerving calm. The humans weren't panicking. They were preparing. And they weren't going to just surrender. The first signs that something was horribly wrong for the Threx came minutes after their orbital bombardment. A few scattered blips appeared on their radar, nothing that registered as a threat, just a few human-made aircraft attempting to flee the carnage below. They were quickly shot down, their fuselages splintering into the atmosphere. Commander Yarnak watched the destruction with detached satisfaction. This was the moment Earth would submit. Except it wasn't. Within the next few minutes, the first unexpected signal came through. A transmission, faint but unmistakable, emanated from deep in Earth's vast communications network. It was an encrypted frequency, one the Threx had been monitoring but had dismissed as irrelevant. They had miscalculated. A message. It was in human binary code. A mere holographic pulse at first, but then, words. The transmission wasn't a plea for help. It was a challenge. You've made a mistake, Threx. Welcome to Earth. The screen flickered as Yarnak stared, unblinking. It was too cryptic, too quick for his fleet's systems to decipher properly. But the implication hit like a sudden burst of cold. The humans were far from defeated. They were not running. Seconds later, the Threx fleet's communications systems scrambled. They were being hacked. The transmission wasn't just a warning. It was a signal. And now, the Earthlings had opened their floodgates. In an instant, everything changed. Across Earth's scattered continents, old defense systems came online. The military satellites that had once been thought destroyed. They weren't gone. They had been repaired, some by human engineers, some by private corporations that had kept their best-kept secrets hidden from the government's eyes. Then the real horror began. From out of nowhere, the Threx found themselves under attack from an entirely unexpected source. Human-made drones, low-tech, civilian models, some piloted by ordinary people, some automated, but they were effective. Hundreds of thousands of drones, modified with stolen Threx weaponry, swooped into the fray. Earth's defenses, once thought useless against a superior force, had now become weapons of pure chaos. The Threx ships were too slow to react to the onslaught, their weapons inefficient against the precision of human tactics. The air over Earth was thick with makeshift missiles, EMP bursts, and magnetic pulses. The humans were everywhere, adaptable and resourceful, using every tool at their disposal. As one Threx destroyer attempted to regroup for a counterattack, a human fighter jet, an outdated civilian plane barely held together by duct tape and welding, smashed through the hull, using a captured Threx pulse weapon to send the ship spiraling into the Pacific Ocean. Yarnek's face twisted with disbelief. The humans weren't fleeing. They were fighting back, and they were winning. As the warships above Earth slowly turned into scrap, a new eerie sensation began to spread across the Threx ranks. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were enjoying it. Earth had no unified army, no central command. Yet, somehow, against all odds, they were decimating the Threx invaders. It was horrifying, not because of their strength, but because they were doing the unthinkable. They were thriving under chaos. And worse, the Threx had awoken the beast. The Threx fleet, once imposing, began to unravel. One by one, their ships fell silent. Some drifted, their hulls punctured by human-made drones. Others, gutted by attacks from within, exploded into space debris. But the most terrifying sight of all, the human resilience. For the Threx, it had been unimaginable. They had expected Earth to bow to their superiority, to cower beneath their advanced weaponry. But the humans were not just resisting. They were evolving, adapting with a speed that baffled the Threx. It wasn't just the military that responded. Every facet of humanity, from scientists to civilians, rallied together in ways the Threx couldn't fathom. The world was a patchwork of fragmented governments, sprawling megacities, and wild landscapes. Yet within this chaos, humanity found a way to fight back. The first sign of the true human response came from the underground bunkers of old Cold War-era military facilities. Once thought abandoned, they were alive again. Commanders, old military officers who had been preparing for an eventual conflict, activated dormant codes and sent encrypted messages to the scattered global defense network. But it wasn't just the military that had been preparing. Human hackers and cyber specialists, operating from the shadows of the internet, began to turn the tide. Communications networks were swiftly taken over. The Threx fleet's delicate systems, designed for interstellar war, but not for counter-hacking, began to malfunction. Key systems controlling weapons, navigation, and even life support were compromised. The Threx were losing control, not only of their ships but also of their minds. Their once precise tactics turned into disorganized chaos as human operatives flooded their networks, leaking every piece of critical information to Earth's war machines. Meanwhile, Earth's armies weren't waiting for orders. They were taking the fight to the streets, using anything at their disposal: crude homemade explosives, Molotov cocktails, and captured alien technology. Every soldier, every citizen, was now part of a global resistance. The cities burned with the fires of war, but they also burned with resolve. Humans had faced extinction before, and every time, they found a way to survive. Across the world, the masses were no longer afraid. They had seen the Threx forces above them, but now they saw their potential. It wasn't about fighting one warship or another. It was about shifting the balance of power. Humanity wasn't playing by the Threx's rules. They were rewriting the game. Then came the turning point. On one fateful day, Earth launched its first coordinated counterattack in deep space. An old satellite, long forgotten and scavenged by tech enthusiasts, had been converted into a weapon of mass destruction. Human engineers had retrofitted it with the best of the Threx tech they had reverse-engineered. The orbital weapon fired a pulse of energy strong enough to send an entire Threx cruiser into a wild, uncontrollable spin. The humans had learned to wield the Threx's own power against them. From that moment forward, it was no longer just a defense. Earth was on the offensive, and the galaxy would soon know what happened when you dared to wake up a sleeping giant. The Threx had underestimated the human willpower, but what truly shocked them was humanity's ability to adapt. It wasn't just the ingenuity of their technology or their sudden ability to turn the tables in combat. It was the creativity behind their response. The humans didn't fight like anyone else in the galaxy. They fought with imagination. Within hours of Earth's first major victories, human scientists, engineers, and former military strategists began reverse-engineering Threx tech at an astonishing rate. Entire underground bunkers turned into high-tech laboratories, powered by a blend of scavenged alien and human technology. One of the first breakthroughs came from Dr. Reeve Carter, a former aerospace engineer turned resistance leader. He and his team had managed to tap into the Threx's communication network and decipher their most vital weaponry systems. But it wasn't enough to just understand the tech. No, humanity needed to use it better than the Threx ever could. Carter and his team weren't trying to replicate the weapons. They were modifying them, making them unpredictable, and most importantly, human. The first true weaponized invention was a modified Threx plasma cannon. The cannon, designed for mass destruction, was reprogrammed to fire smaller, more efficient projectiles, ones that would ricochet through multiple Threx ships, cutting through their hulls before detonating with devastating effect. But humans didn't stop there. They built entire fleets of hijacked Threx ships, slapping human camouflage over their alien exteriors and packing them with the most basic of weapons: explosives, EMPs, and human fury. Humanity's asymmetric warfare had reached a terrifying new level. It wasn't just about brute force anymore. It was about psychological warfare, about making the Threx doubt their superiority. The resistance adapted on the fly, exploiting alien weaknesses the Threx hadn't even noticed in their own ships. Meanwhile, human civilians, once thought incapable of anything other than a passive resistance, were now soldiers. They took up arms, literally and figuratively. Farmers modified their tractors into tanks, fishermen used harpoons as missile launchers, and even teenagers, with their seemingly limitless energy, hacked into Threx drones and turned them against their creators. But the most terrifying development was the rise of the human hacker collective. These unassuming tech gurus were turning the tide of war with sheer force of will. The Threx fleet, with its superior technology, had never imagined that human hackers could infiltrate their encrypted systems, steal their coordinates, and reroute entire fleets into ambushes. The Threx were now fighting a war they didn't understand. They thought they had the technology, the manpower, and the experience to crush the humans, but what they didn't have was the human spirit. Every failed strike was met with even more human ingenuity, and every setback pushed Earth's resistance into more creative, impossible solutions. As the war stretched on, the humans turned their once primitive world into a sprawling war machine. They had taken every scrap, every fragment of the Threx's advanced weaponry, and forged it into something entirely new. The Threx fleet was no longer an invincible force. It was a collection of vulnerable targets, and Earth, with its endless adaptability, was now their worst nightmare. The war was just beginning, but one thing was clear. The humans weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to win. And the Threx had no idea how to stop them. Commander Yarnak watched the chaos unfold from the safety of his command deck, the massive viewport revealing Earth's surface below, now a battlefield strewn with the wreckage of his once pristine fleet. He gritted his teeth as his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. The entire operation had spiraled beyond his control. The humans had fought back with terrifying creativity, exploiting every weakness, every gap in the Threx's superior technology. The humans had breached their systems in ways that were impossible to predict. There was no order to their tactics, just relentless chaos, like 1,000 different minds working together as one, each acting with fierce determination. Yarnak had underestimated their resolve, and now it was costing him everything. Reports continued flooding in. His fleet was being dismantled piecemeal. No longer were the Threx destroying human forces. It was the other way around. Outnumbered and outgunned, the Threx were running out of options. Their warships, once symbols of dominance, were now sitting ducks in the upper atmosphere, vulnerable to human-made space mines, hack drones, and unpredictable guerrilla attacks. Worse still, many of the Threx ships were turning on each other. Their communication networks had been infiltrated and their systems sabotaged, making the once unified fleet descend into a state of panic and confusion. As his command room buzzed with alarms and frantic voices, Yarnak's thoughts turned to his last resort. The Threx superweapon, a colossal device capable of wiping out entire continents. It had been prepared for moments of extreme desperation, but Yarnak had never imagined he'd have to use it on Earth. The weapon was powerful, but it came at a tremendous cost. It could only be fired once, and its activation would require full fleet coordination, something the Threx were no longer capable of. Still, Yarnak was out of time. Earth had rallied every ounce of its resistance, from civilian militias to specialized covert teams, and now the Threx had no way to stop them. What had begun as an easy strike against a primitive world had escalated into an uncontainable conflict. The humans had found ways to leverage their strength and their resolve, and the Threx, with all their advanced technology and battle-hardened warriors, were on the verge of defeat. Meanwhile, on the ground, Earth's forces were growing bolder by the day. General Maria Alvarado, leader of the United Human Resistance, looked out over the makeshift war room in what had once been a quiet underground research facility. Her eyes were sharp, focused. Every moment counted. They had the Threx on the ropes, but they needed to act fast. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for revenge, for justice. The planet had been violated, and now they would make the invaders pay. And Earth wasn't alone anymore. Across the stars, other species had begun to take notice. The Galactic Concord had dispatched emissaries to Earth to negotiate a ceasefire. But Maria knew one thing: they had waited too long. The Threx were finished, and humanity would make sure no one would forget what had happened the day they were provoked. As the Threx Dominion reeled from the mounting losses, Commander Yarnak's desperation deepened. He was losing control of the situation, not just on Earth, but in the very fabric of his fleet. Earth's forces had turned the tides of the conflict. And now, they weren't just defending. They were going on the offensive. What was once thought to be a primitive world full of disjointed nations was proving to be an unparalleled war machine, a juggernaut of unpredictable ingenuity. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting to eradicate the Threx from the stars. Across the galaxy, the Threx Empire was already beginning to fall into disarray. Systems that had once been under tight Threx control were now rising up. Other species who had suffered under Threx oppression for centuries saw the message Earth had sent. If the humans could rise up and break the Threx, so could they. In the outer reaches of the galaxy, resistance cells on countless worlds began to gain momentum. The Threx, once regarded as the ruthless, unassailable conquerors of the galaxy, now found themselves facing not just Earth's fury, but a growing coalition of freedom fighters. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from Earth's fight. Never underestimate the will of a species pushed to the brink. Back on Earth, General Alvarado's forces began preparing for their next phase, one that would carry the fight directly to the heart of Threx territory. They had made significant technological advances, most notably from the reverse-engineered Threx ships, now piloted by human crews. These ships, once used against the human race, had been retrofitted with Earth's military-grade weapons. But it wasn't just the firepower that had changed. Earth had adapted to galactic warfare in ways that sent shudders through the Threx military. They had quickly discovered that humans didn't just mimic the Threx's technology, they improved it. Armed with hacked propulsion systems and enhanced targeting protocols, Earth's new fleet of warships became a nightmare for the Threx. The first coordinated human attack came from deep space. A fleet of modified Threx ships, now piloted by a unified human command, blitzed through the Threx defenses in the Lagrange system, a key military hub for the Dominion. The attack was swift and brutal, with human forces outflanking Threx battle stations, disabling their defensive grids, and reducing the heavily fortified outpost to ashes in less than an hour. The Threx didn't have time to regroup. Back at the heart of the Threx Dominion, panic began to set in. The leadership scrambled to activate their superweapon, the weapon that had been designed to wipe out entire planets, Earth's homeworld, the last resort. But as Yarnak prepared to execute his desperate final move, a message intercepted from Earth's resistance made him hesitate. "You don't have the firepower to defeat us, and we're coming for you." The humans were no longer playing by anyone's rules. Earth's counterattack had begun, and the Threx were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. The Threx Dominion had never imagined such a shift in the tides of war. The human resistance had not only outmatched them in space, they had outwitted and outlasted the might of a galactic empire. Now, with their forces dwindling and morale in freefall, the Threx were teetering on the edge of annihilation. But Commander Yarnak, though shaken, was not without his last card, the superweapon. Earth's forces, however, were already aware of the weapon's existence. Their spy networks and infiltrators had uncovered the truth, and a countdown had already begun. Humanity was prepared to meet it head-on. No longer would Earth play defense. It was time for the humans to bring the fight to the heart of Threx power. The Threx superweapon, known as Ithrax, was a doomsday device of unimaginable power, capable of devastating not just Earth, but entire solar systems. Built using the dark energy technologies the Threx had developed over centuries, Ithrax had the ability to erase entire worlds with a single burst. But the humans had their own ace up their sleeve. General Alvarado had led her forces into Threx-controlled space, commandeering every piece of technology they could find. Armed with scavenged Threx weaponry, the human fleet moved closer to the heart of the Dominion's homeworld, an operation that seemed impossible just weeks ago. They had infiltrated the most secure and isolated regions of the Threx Empire, systematically neutralizing their defenses. Alvarado had a plan, and it wasn't just to destroy the superweapon, it was to end the war. The human fleet, now a hybrid of stolen Threx ships and Earth's own craft, gathered at the edge of Threx's largest colony, Vaxis. The Threx believed they could launch Ithrax before their enemies could reach it. But they were wrong. Within the heart of the fleet, Dr. Reeve Carter, the chief scientist who had once helped reverse engineer the Threx technology, was finalizing his weapon, a paradox engine designed to counteract the superweapon's dark energy signature. It was an untested, borderline insane idea, but it was their only hope. The device was capable of disrupting the Ithrax's core, potentially turning it against the Threx, or at the very least, rendering it useless. As Earth's ships closed in on the massive citadel surrounding the superweapon, a final desperate message from Yarnak broke through the static of their communication channels. "You cannot win. Earth will burn. You cannot fight the Dominion's wrath." Alvarado's voice was steady, cold with fury. "You're wrong. We've already won." The human fleet surged forward, an unstoppable force moving to take down Ithrax, and with it, the Threx's grip on the galaxy. The final battle had begun, and there was no turning back. In the midst of the chaos, as the fleets clashed above Vaxis, a reckoning was unfolding, not just for the Threx, but for the entire galaxy. The age of the Threx Empire was ending, and Earth was going to make sure the universe would never forget it. The skies above Vaxis were a swirling maelstrom of chaos as the final battle raged. The human fleet, a patchwork of stolen Threx ships, Earth-made fighters, and makeshift weapons, fought with a fury and unity the Threx had never expected. The soundless violence of space was punctuated only by the occasional rumble of explosions as ships disintegrated in a violent cascade of fire and debris. Human warships darted in and out of Threx defenses with unparalleled precision, using the same unpredictability that had marked their entire campaign. Commander Yarnak, watching from his flagship, the Dominance, clenched his fists as the reality set in. His forces were no longer the feared conquerors of the galaxy. They were cornered, and the humans were closing in on his greatest weapon, the superweapon that had been designed to ensure the Threx's absolute dominance. But the humans were relentless, pushing forward through the wreckage of the once mighty Threx armada. General Alvarado led the charge, her voice steady over the communications network as she issued commands to her fleet. Push forward. Disable their command center. We take Ithrax now. The fleet surged in a final, coordinated assault. Threx warships exploded in spectacular fashion as Earth's forces fought their way toward the central citadel housing Ithrax. The paradox engine Dr. Carter had developed was already activated, its low hum vibrating through the hulls of the human ships. It was their last shot, and they knew it. If they failed to disable Ithrax, the consequences would be catastrophic. But the humans were driven by more than just survival now. They were fueled by the desire to avenge the centuries of oppression the Threx had inflicted on countless species. And they were fueled by the one thing the Threx had never understood, the human spirit. As the human forces neared the citadel, the Threx attempted one final counterattack. A burst of dark energy erupted from Ithrax's core, ripping through space in an attempt to wipe out the advancing fleet. It was a powerful, devastating shot, but it was unpredictable, exactly what Earth had been counting on. The paradox engine activated just as Ithrax's pulse struck. A shockwave rippled through the battlefield, and then a sudden, blinding flash of light. For a moment, everything stopped. When the light faded, the Threx fleet had been disrupted. Their ships, once bristling with power, now drifted, incapacitated, their weapons silent. The superweapon had been neutralized. The Threx had lost. On the surface of Vaxis, General Alvarado watched from the viewport of her flagship, breathing heavily as the battle winds down. Earth's victory was absolute. Yarnak's transmission came through, garbled and broken. This isn't over. You've only delayed the inevitable. The Threx will rise again. Alvarado's voice cut through, calm and resolute. Not this time. The galaxy is no longer your empire. With the Threx superweapon disabled, the remnants of their forces scattered, and their leadership in disarray, Earth's final victory was assured. The resistance was no longer just a movement. It was the future of the galaxy. As Earth's ships turned back toward their homeworld, a quiet sense of triumph settled over the battlefield. The Threx had been brought low, their empire broken, and humanity had emerged victorious. The Cardinal Directive, the ancient warning to never provoke Earth, would now be etched into the minds of all galactic civilizations. The Threx had violated it, and they would suffer the consequences for eternity. The humans had fought, and they had won.